This little girl was dumped in a landfill by her stepmother, who wanted to take all of her soon-to-be-deceased father's wealth. But in the place she thought was deserted, and where the girl would lose her life, there was a man, and what this man did with the little girl will leave you speechless. Comment from what city you're watching this video and subscribe to the channel to support my work. The rain fell in a monotonous rhythm against the windows of the Montgomery mansion, creating a sad melody that mingled with Emily's muffled sobs. The 12-year-old girl was huddled on her bed, clutching the princess dress her father had given her that afternoon. Her fingers delicately caressed the silver tiara that lay beside her as she tried to ignore the raised voices coming from the hallway. "You spoil that girl too much, Raymond," Sapphire's voice echoed, laced with venom. "A princess dress? She's old enough to understand that life isn't a fairy tale." Emily hugged her pillow tighter, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. Ever since Sapphire had entered their lives 3 years ago, moments of joy with her father had become increasingly rare. The stepmother, with her flawless beauty and calculated smile, seemed determined to suck all the happiness out of that house. The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway made Emily hold her breath. The door opened slowly, revealing her father's pale and tired figure. Raymond Montgomery was no longer the same person he had been a few months ago. The successful businessman, owner of a chain of automated parking garages, seemed to have aged years in a matter of weeks. His face was thinner, his eyes sunken, and a constant tremor ran through his hands. "Princess," he whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I'm sorry about today. I just wanted your birthday to be special." Emily threw herself into her father's arms, feeling the familiar warmth of his embrace. But there was something different. Raymond was weaker, his body felt more fragile, and his breathing was uneven. "Dad, are you sick again?" she asked, pulling away to look into his eyes. Raymond tried to smile, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, sweetheart. It's just a passing discomfort. I'll be better soon." But Emily knew it wasn't true. For months, her father had been exhibiting strange symptoms: weakness, dizziness, aches and pains. The doctors couldn't identify the cause, and with each passing day, he seemed to waste away a little more. "Why don't you get some rest?" Sapphire appeared in the doorway, her voice falsely sweet. "You need to recover, darling. Emily is all grown up. She understands that her father needs rest." Raymond nodded wearily, kissed his daughter's forehead, and stood up with difficulty. Emily watched helplessly as Sapphire guided him out of the room, casting one last, icy look in her direction before closing the door. Alone again, Emily got up and walked to the window. The rain continued to fall, turning the garden into blurred shadows. Her reflection in the glass showed a frightened girl, with tousled brown hair and eyes red from crying. Something was wrong, very wrong. It wasn't just her father's mysterious illness that worried her. It was the way Sapphire acted when she thought no one was watching. The smiles that disappeared as soon as Raymond turned his back. The whispered phone calls she made late at night, and mainly the way her eyes sparkled every time her father showed a new symptom. Emily went back to bed and picked up the tiara she had won. Even though it was a simple gift, it meant a lot to her. It was a symbol of her father's love, a reminder of happier times when it was just the two of them against the world. A movement in the hallway caught her attention. Soft footsteps approached her room. Emily immediately recognized Sapphire's calculated walk. Her heart began to beat faster as the doorknob turned slowly. The stepmother entered the room like a shadow. Her face, normally marked by a mask of false kindness, now displayed an expression Emily had never seen before. "You know, honey," Sapphire began, her voice low and dangerous, "I have a special surprise for you, something that will make this night unforgettable." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in Sapphire's tone that put her on alert, like a cornered animal sensing the approach of a predator. "What kind of surprise?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The kind a little princess like you deserves," Sapphire replied, a cruel smile forming on her perfectly painted lips. "Put on your coat. Let's go for a ride." Emily looked instinctively at the window. The rain had turned into a storm, and occasional lightning flashes illuminated the dark sky. "But it's raining really hard," she protested, stepping back. "Don't worry about the rain," Sapphire insisted, her tone brooking no argument. "Your father is sleeping, and I promised him I'd do something special for your birthday. You don't want to disappoint your father, do you?" The mention of her father made Emily hesitate. She knew something was wrong, that she shouldn't trust Sapphire. But the idea of disappointing Raymond, especially now that he was so sick, was unbearable. "Okay," she finally agreed, reaching for her coat. Sapphire watched with satisfaction as Emily got ready. Her eyes gleamed in a way that resembled the lightning outside, cold and unforgiving. "Come on, sweetie," she called, extending her hand. "Your surprise awaits." Emily glanced one last time at the tiara on her bed, feeling a pang in her chest. For some reason she couldn't explain, she had the feeling that tonight would change her life forever. The car glided silently through the dark city streets, the headlights cutting through the curtain of rain that fell mercilessly. Emily was sitting in the back seat, her hands nervously clutching the hem of her coat as she watched the city lights become increasingly distant. Sapphire drove in silence, her eyes occasionally meeting Emily's in the rearview mirror, an unsettling smile playing on her lips. "Where are we going?" Emily finally mustered the courage to ask, her voice trembling slightly. "Patience, darling," Sapphire replied, making a sharp turn that led the car into an abandoned industrial area. "The best surprises are the ones we don't expect." Emily's heart began to beat faster when she realized they were getting further and further away from civilization. The paved streets gave way to dirt roads, and the buildings were replaced by abandoned warehouses and vacant lots. The smell of garbage and decay began to invade the car, making her stomach churn. I think I want to go home," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sapphire slammed on the brakes, causing the car to skid in the mud. Her face, formerly a mask of false sweetness, now showed all the cruelty that Emily had always suspected existed behind that facade. "You know, Emily," Sapphire began, turning to face her, "you've always been a problem for me, from day one. That spoiled little brat who had all her father's love, all the money, all the attention." Emily shrank against the seat, feeling the fear grow in her chest like a hungry beast. Sapphire's words were like poison, distilling years of repressed hatred. "Your father. Ah, your dear father," Sapphire continued, a cruel smile forming on her lips. "So busy spoiling you that he never realized what was happening right under his nose, never questioned why he was getting sicker and weaker." The words hit Emily like a punch. Suddenly, all the pieces began to fall into place. The cups of tea that Sapphire insisted on preparing personally for her father, the medication she controlled so carefully, the mysterious phone calls late at night. "What did you do to my father?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with fear and anger. "I did what was necessary," Sapphire replied coldly. "In a few hours your father will sleep forever, and the entire empire he built will be mine. I just have to take care of one last detail." The look Sapphire gave Emily made it clear what that detail was. The girl tried to open the car door, but it was locked. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to explode. "Please," Emily pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't do this." But Sapphire had already made her decision. With a quick movement, she got out of the car and opened the back door, grabbing Emily by the arm hard enough to leave marks. The rain fell mercilessly as Sapphire dragged Emily through a muddy path. The smell of garbage became stronger and stronger, and Emily could see mountains of debris piling up around her. They were at a landfill, a place where no one would think to look for a missing girl. "You know what's most ironic?" Sapphire said, her voice almost inaudible under the noise of the storm. "That ridiculous princess dress your father gave you. You really believed you were special, didn't you? Well, this is reality, sweetie. This is your castle now." With a violent shove, Sapphire threw Emily into the debris. The girl fell onto a pile of wet trash, feeling the impact reverberate throughout her body. Her tiara, which was still in her pocket, fell and rolled through the mud, breaking into pieces. "Goodbye, princess," Sapphire mocked, turning her back. And walking back to the car, Emily tried to get up but slipped in the mud and fell again. She screamed for help, but her voice was swallowed by the sound of the rain and thunder. She watched helplessly as the taillights of Sapphire's car disappeared into the darkness, taking with them her last connection to the world she knew. The storm continued to lash her small, trembling body. Emily crawled to a discarded piece of cardboard, trying to shield herself from the rain. Her thoughts were with her father, alone at home, slowly dying from Sapphire's poison. Guilt consumed her. If only she had realized sooner, if she had told someone. The hours passed slowly. The rain lessened to a drizzle, but the cold and darkness seemed to penetrate to her bones. Emily trembled uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard that her jaw ached. She closed her eyes, trying to convince herself that it was all just a terrible nightmare, that she would soon wake up in her warm bed with her father smiling at her. A noise nearby startled her. Footsteps approached, crushing debris under heavy boots. Emily huddled even further, trying to become invisible among the piles of trash. Could it be Sapphire returning to finish what she started? A faint light cut through the darkness, and Emily held her breath. The light drew closer, gradually revealing the silhouette of a man. He seemed tall and strong, but something in his movements was cautious, almost gentle. "Is anyone there?" a male voice called, out surprisingly soft for someone of his stature. Emily remained silent, her heart beating so loudly she was sure the stranger could hear it. The flashlight beams swept the area once more, finally finding her makeshift hiding place. "Good heavens," the man murmured, clearly shocked by what he saw. "It's just a child." He approached slowly, as if afraid to scare her even more. When the light fully illuminated Emily's face, she could see that, despite his plain appearance and worn clothes, his eyes were kind and worried. "Don't be afraid," he said, crouching down to her level. "My name is Mario. I'm going to help you." Emily looked at him through her tears, clutching the broken pieces of her tiara. Something in his voice, in his gaze, made her feel like she could trust him. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was intuition, but at that moment, Mario seemed to be her only hope for survival. "My father," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I need to save my father." Mario led Emily through the labyrinth of debris to a small, makeshift shack, built with reclaimed materials, but surprisingly clean and organized inside. He lit a lantern, revealing a modest space with a simple bed, a few chairs, and shelves filled with books, an unexpected sight amidst the desolate setting of the landfill. "First, you need to warm up," he said, handing her a clean blanket and a mug of hot tea he had prepared on a small stove. "Then, tell me what happened." Emily accepted the tea with trembling hands, the warmth of the drink slowly restoring some feeling to her numb fingers. As she drank, she watched her savior with curiosity. There was something different about him, something that didn't fit with this environment. His hands, though calloused, had precise and educated movements. His posture, even in simple clothes, carried a dignity that did not go unnoticed. "Why do you live here?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Mario smiled slightly, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves." he replied enigmatically. But now is not the time to talk. About me, I need to know what happened to you. Who is your father? Emily took a deep breath, feeling the tears welling up in her eyes again. My father is Raymond Montgomery, she said, noticing a flash of recognition in Mario's eyes. He's dying. My stepmother, Sapphire, is poisoning him. Mario stood motionless for a moment, his face a mask of controlled emotions. Raymond Montgomery, he repeated as if savoring each syllable. The owner of the chain of automated parking garages? Yes, Emily confirmed, clutching the mug between her hands. Do you know him? I knew him, Mario corrected, his voice laden with an old sadness. A long time ago. We were friends. Emily leaned forward, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Then you can help. You can help me save him. Mario got up and began to pace the small space, his hands clasped behind his back. Emily could see that he was fighting an internal battle, weighing decisions that seemed to go far beyond the present moment. Tell me more about Sapphire, he asked finally, returning to sit down. When did the poisoning start? Emily frowned, trying to organize her memories. I think it started a few months ago. Dad started getting weak with dizzy spells. The doctors couldn't figure out what it was. But I saw Sapphire making his tea every night. She never let anyone else do it. And today? Mario questioned, his voice gentle but firm. What happened for you to end up here? The tears returned in full force as Emily recounted the events of the night. The surprise promised by Sapphire, the terrifying ride to the landfill, the stepmother's cruel words. When she got to the part where Sapphire revealed her plan to kill Raymond, her voice completely failed. Mario listened to everything in silence, his face growing more grave with each word. When Emily finished, he got up again and went to one of the shelves, pulling out an old book. From inside it, he took out a photograph yellowed with age. Take a look at this, he said, handing the photo to Emily. In the faded image, two young men smiled at the camera, wearing graduation gowns. Emily immediately recognized her father, much younger, but with the same gentle smile that she loved so much. Beside him was a man she took a few seconds to recognize as a younger version of Mario. This photo was taken 25 years ago, Mario explained, his voice laden with nostalgia. Your father and I were best friends in college. We had big dreams, big plans, but life took us down different paths. Emily looked from the photo to Mario, trying to process this new information. What happened? She asked softly. Mario sat down heavily, suddenly seeming very tired. I got lost, Emily. I got lost in the pursuit of money and power. While your father built a solid business and a family, I became obsessed. I worked day and night, made a fortune, but lost my humanity in the process. He paused, his eyes lost in distant memories. When my parents died, I was too busy closing a multi-million-dollar deal to be by their side. It was the moment. I realized I had turned into a monster. Emily listened attentively, momentarily forgetting her own drama. There was a deep pain in Mario's voice, a pain that she, even so young, could understand. So you left everything behind? She asked. Yes, he confirmed. I left my fortune untouched in a bank account and came here. I needed to reconnect with what really matters in life. I needed to find myself again. Suddenly Mario stood up, a new energy emanating from him. But now, fate has brought us together for a reason. Your father needs help, and I have the means to help him. He walked to a small chest in the corner of the shack and opened it, revealing a modern cell phone, another object that seemed out of place in that environment. First, he said, picking up the device, we're going to find out exactly what kind of poison Sapphire is using. Then we're going to act, but we need to be quick and careful. If she suspects anything, your father could be in even greater danger." Emily felt a wave of hope rise in her chest. "How are we going to do that?" Mario smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes. "I have some contacts I never left behind, people who owe me favors, and more importantly, I have resources that Sapphire doesn't even imagine exist." He knelt in front of Emily, holding her small hands in his. "I promise we're going to save your father, Emily, but I need you to be strong and brave. Can you do that?" Emily nodded, squeezing Mario's hands. For the first time since Sapphire had entered their lives, she felt that there was a real chance to save her father. But a doubt still bothered her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Why do you care so much?" Mario was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the old photo that was still on the table. "Because sometimes," he said finally, "the universe gives us a second chance to do the right thing, and this time I'm not going to waste it." The night wore on slowly as Mario made a series of calls on his cell phone, speaking in codes that Emily didn't fully understand. She watched him, wrapped in the blanket, fighting against the sleep that threatened to overwhelm her. The hot tea and the warmth of the small shelter had restored some comfort to her exhausted body, but her mind remained alert, worried about her father. "I got some information," Mario said finally, hanging up the phone. "A friend of mine works in the lab at the Central Hospital. He'll analyze a sample of the tea that Sapphire is preparing for your father, but we need to get that sample first." Emily felt her heart race. "How are we going to do that? I can't go back home." "Sapphire, you're not going back," Mario interrupted firmly. "It's too dangerous. But I know someone who can help us get into the house without being noticed." He took a small notebook and started taking notes. "Does your house have a security system?" "Yes," Emily replied, frowning in concentration. "But I know all the codes. Dad always wanted me to know in case of an emergency." Mario smiled slightly. "Your father was always careful." He took a few more notes before continuing. "And where does Sapphire keep the tea ingredients?" "In her drawer in the master bedroom. She always locks it, but—" Emily hesitated for a moment. "But sometimes when she thinks no one is looking, she takes a small vial from inside the drawer and puts a few drops in Dad's tea." Mario's hands stopped writing. "A small vial. Can you describe it?" Emily closed her eyes, trying to remember the details. "It's dark, almost black. It has a gold cap. Once, when the bedroom door was ajar, I saw Sapphire putting it back into a little wooden box inside the drawer." Mario made a few more notes, his face growing more serious. "Emily, I need you to tell me one more thing. When was the last time your father drank this tea?" "This afternoon," she replied, feeling a knot forming in her throat. "Before Sapphire brought me here. She made Dad drink a whole cup, said it was to help him sleep better." Mario stood up abruptly, grabbing his cell phone again. "We need to act now. If she increased the dose, your father may not have much time." He quickly typed a message and then began to remove loose boards from the floor of the shack. Emily watched, surprised, as he revealed a secret compartment containing a briefcase. "What is that?" she asked, curious. "Something I swore I'd never use again," he replied, opening the briefcase. Inside were documents, a state-of-the-art laptop, and several bank cards. But some promises need to be broken for the greater good. Mario turned on the laptop and began to type rapidly. Numbers and graphs filled the screen as he accessed what appeared to be a bank account with values that Emily could barely comprehend. "Throughout all these years," he explained without taking his eyes off the screen, "I kept my fortune intact, not out of greed, but because something inside me knew that one day I'd need it for a good reason." He looked at Emily with a sad smile. "I think I've finally found that reason." The sound of an engine interrupted the conversation. Headlights illuminated the inside of the shack for a moment, and Emily cringed instinctively, fearing it was Sapphire, but Mario seemed calm. "It's friends," he said, putting the laptop back in the briefcase. "Trusted people who are going to help us." Two men entered the shack. They wore ordinary clothes, but there was something in their posture that indicated professional training. The taller of the two, a gray-haired gentleman, greeted Mario with a hug. "Long time, old friend," he said before turning to Emily. "This must be the girl." "Emily," Mario introduced, "this is Robert, an old friend. He and Carlos are going to help us save your father." Robert knelt in front of Emily, his kind eyes examining her tired face. "Don't worry, little one. We're experts at resolving complicated situations." "What's the plan?" asked Carlos, the other man, who had remained silent until then. Mario opened a map of the city on his laptop. "We need to act on two fronts. Robert, you and your team are going to enter the Montgomery house. Emily will provide the security codes. We need that vial of poison and a sample of the tea, if there's any left." Robert nodded, making his own notes. "And then Carlos will take the samples directly to the lab. We need a full analysis in no more than 2 hours. Meanwhile, I'm going to activate my contacts at the hospital. As soon as we know what kind of poison it is, we need to be ready to act." Emily watched the conversation, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. It was strange to see those people who until a few hours ago had been complete strangers, mobilizing to help her. "And me?" she asked timidly. "What can I do to help?" Mario approached her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You've already done a lot, Emily. You were brave enough to survive and trust me. Now, I need you to continue being strong and patient. I promise I won't let anything happen to your father." A phone rang, and Robert answered quickly. After a brief, earned conversation, he turned to the group. "The team is in position. We can start whenever you want." Mario looked at Emily one last time. "Are you sure about the security codes?" She nodded, reciting the numbers that her father had made her memorize. Mario wrote them down carefully and handed the paper to Robert. "Keep her safe," Robert instructed, pocketing the paper. "We'll handle this." As the two men quickly left the shack, Emily felt the weight of exhaustion finally overcoming her. Her eyelids were heavy, and even her worry about her father could no longer keep her alert. "Get some rest," Mario said gently, helping her lie down on the small bed. "When you wake up, this will all be just a bad memory." Emily wanted to protest, wanted to stay awake and know everything that was happening, but her body had other plans. The last thing she saw before falling asleep was Mario sitting in his chair, the laptop open on his lap, his fingers typing non-stop as he coordinated the operation that could save her father's life. Emily woke up with a start, taking a few seconds to recognize where she was. The small shack was illuminated by the faint light of dawn filtering through the cracks in the walls. Mario was still in his chair, but now he was speaking in a low voice on the phone, his tense face revealing that something wasn't going as planned. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice laden with concern. No, keep watch. We can't take any chances." He hung up the phone and only then noticed that Emily was awake. His face softened at the sight of her, but there was a shadow in his eyes that made her sit up immediately in bed. "What happened?" she asked, her heart already racing. "My father." "Your father is alive," Mario hastened to say. "But the situation is more complicated than we imagined." He got up and began to pace the small space. A habit that Emily had already noticed was a sign of his worry. "Robert managed to get into the house and found the vial," he explained. "Carlos is already at the lab analyzing the contents." But what?" Emily insisted, the anxiety growing in her chest. Mario stopped walking and looked directly at her. "Sapphire is no longer at the house. According to the surveillance team, she left about an hour ago carrying a briefcase. And she took some important documents with her." Emily felt her blood run cold. What kind of documents? Papers from your father's office and, he hesitated for a moment, a blank power of attorney. The implications of those words hit Emily like a punch. Her father, weakened by the poison, could be forced to sign anything that Sapphire put in front of him. "We need to do something," she exclaimed, jumping out of bed. "She's going to come back. She's going to make him sign." "Calm down," Mario interrupted her gently, placing his hands on her shoulders. "We're already taking action. I have people following Sapphire and others watching the house. She won't be able to do anything without us knowing." At that moment, Mario's cell phone rang again. It was Carlos, from the lab. Emily watched Mario's expression change as he listened to the report, his face growing more serious. "I understand," he said finally. "Yes, send the full results to my email. And Carlos, thank you." When he hung up, Mario sat down heavily in his chair. "The poison," he began, his voice strained, "is a rare substance difficult to detect in common tests. It gradually weakens the organism, affecting various organs. If we don't treat your father soon—" He didn't complete the sentence, but he didn't need to. Emily could see in his eyes the gravity of the situation. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If she really increased the dose yesterday, like you said, maybe a few hours?" Emily felt her legs buckle and needed to lean against the wall. The idea of losing her father, the only real family she had, was unbearable. "But there's an antidote, isn't there?" She asked, clinging to any hope. Mario nodded slowly. "Yes, there is, but it's not something we can get at any pharmacy. It needs to be prepared specifically for the type of poison used." He picked up his laptop and began to type rapidly. "Luckily, I have contacts at a private clinic that can prepare the antidote. I've already sent them the test results. The problem is time," Emily completed, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Exactly. We not only need to get the antidote, but also administer it before Sapphire comes back. And more importantly, we need to stop her from making your father sign any document." The cell phone rang again. It was Robert. "She's coming back," Mario informed after a brief conversation. "Sapphire was seen heading towards the house, and she's not alone. There's a man with her carrying a briefcase." "A lawyer," Emily murmured, feeling her heart clench. Mario began to make more calls, his voice taking on a commanding tone that Emily hadn't heard yet. It was as if another person had emerged. Someone used to giving orders and having his instructions followed without question. "Listen, Emily," he said between calls. "I'm going to need to leave for a few hours. I need to personally pick up the antidote and coordinate our action at the house. You're going to stay here with Helen." As if summoned by his words, a gentle-looking lady entered the shack. She had grey hair tied in a bun and kind eyes behind her glasses. "Helen is a retired nurse," Mario explained. "She's going to take care of you while I'm gone." Emily wanted to protest, wanted to go with him, do something to help her father, but she knew she would be more of a problem than a solution. "Promise you'll save him?" she asked, holding Mario's hand. He knelt down to her level, his eyes fixed on hers. "I promise I'll do everything in my power. And believe me, Emily, my power is greater than Sapphire imagines." Before leaving, Mario took something from his briefcase and handed it to Emily. It was the old photo of him with her father at graduation. "So, you remember that your father isn't alone in this fight," he said with a small smile. Emily held the photo to her chest, watching Mario quickly leave the shack. Helen approached and put an arm around her. "It's going to be all right, dear," the lady said softly. "I've known Mario for many years. When he promises something, he delivers." Emily nodded, but couldn't hold back the tears that began to fall. She sat on the small bed, still clutching the photograph, while the sun continued to rise in the sky, marking the passage of time. Time that her father might not have. Please, she whispered, although she didn't know exactly who she was praying. 2. Please don't let it be too late. The hours dragged on in the small shack as Emily awaited news, her stomach churning with anxiety. Helen tried to distract her with stories and even managed to get her to eat some soup she had brought in a thermos, but nothing could take away her worry for her father. The cell phone that Mario had left with them rang periodically. Helen answered, exchanged a few words in a low voice, and made notes in a small notebook. Emily tried to glean some information from the lady's expressions, but her face remained serene and neutral during the calls. Why don't you tell me more about your father? Helen asked gently after another call. Mario told me that you're very close. Emily hugged her knees, the graduation photo still in her hands. It's always just been the two of us, she began, her voice soft. As long as I can remember, Dad always found a way to be present, even though he was so busy. He created the automated and parking garages precisely so he could spend more time with me. Helen smiled, encouraging her to continue. Emily closed her eyes, letting the memories flow. Every Sunday was our special day. No matter what happened, he set aside the whole day just for me. We would have picnics in the park, go to the movies, or sometimes just stay home, making crazy recipes in the kitchen. She laughed softly at the memory. Once we tried to make a chocolate cake and ended up with flour all over the ceiling. Her smile disappeared when the more recent memories surfaced. Everything changed when Sapphire appeared. In the beginning, she pretended to like me. She was all smiles and gifts. But her eyes were always cold. Helen placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. How did they meet? At a charity event, Emily replied, her voice bitter. She organized those events, you know. Always surrounded by important people. Always smiling for the cameras. Dad was charmed. He said she had a heart of gold. She shook her head. Little did he know it was all a lie. The cell phone rang again, interrupting the conversation. This time, Helen's expression changed subtly as she listened. When she hung up, she turned to Emily with a serious look. Mario got the antidote, she informed her, but we have a problem. Sapphire returned home with a lawyer and 2 other people. They're in the room with your father now. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. She's going to force him to sign something, she whispered, the panic growing in her voice. She's going to steal everything from him. Helen held her hands firmly. Listen, Emily. Mario has a plan, but he needs your help. He wants to know, is there any place in the house, any hiding place that only you and your father know about? Emily frowned, thinking. Suddenly her eyes widened. The safe! She exclaimed. There's a secret safe in the office. It's behind. A painting, but not the obvious one, the big one with the company name. It's a small one, a landscape that Mom painted before she died. Helen was already typing rapidly on the cell phone. And do you know the combination? Yes, Emily replied. It's my mother's birthday. Dad never changed it. Said that way she would always be protecting our most important things. As Helen relayed the information, Emily continued. Inside the safe are important documents. Dad showed me once, said they were the original copies of the company contracts, proving he's the sole owner. That could be exactly what we need, Helen murmured, more to herself than to Emily. The cell phone rang again almost immediately. Helen listened for a few moments, making occasional sounds of agreement. Robert is inside the house, she explained after hanging up. He managed to get in through the ventilation system while Sapphire and her guests were distracted in the bedroom. He's going to check the safe. The following minutes were agonizing. Emily paced back and forth in the small space, stopping occasionally to look through the crack in the wall, as if she could see across the city to her house. When the phone rang again, Helen answered quickly. Her expression went from tense to relieved as she listened. They found the documents, she said, a small smile forming on her lips. And more than that, they found something Sapphire wasn't expecting. What? Asked Emily, moving closer anxiously. A will, replied Helen. Your father must have put it there recently. In it, he explicitly leaves everything to you with a boom special clause, saying that if anything happens to him under suspicious circumstances, a full investigation must be conducted before any transfer of assets can be made. Emily felt a surge of love and pride for her father. Even sick, even being poisoned, he had thought to protect her. But what now? She asked. Sapphire is still there with him. She can still force him to sign something. Helen was about to answer when the cell phone rang once more. This time, her expression turned grave as she listened. I understand, she said. Yes, we'll stay alert. When she hung up, her face was tense. The situation is getting complicated, she explained. Your father is very weak. Mario is on his way with the antidote. But Sapphire won't let anyone into the room. She brought in a private doctor, someone who is probably in cahoots with her. Emily felt the panic rise again. So what are we going to do? Helen picked up her bag and began to take out some items. I'm going to need your help, Emily. I'm a nurse, remember? And I know that house thanks to the photos and floor plans Mario showed me. I have a plan, but it's going to require a lot of courage on your part. Emily straightened her shoulders, determination shining in her eyes. I'll do anything to save my father. Helen smiled, a smile that mixed admiration and concern. Then, listen to me carefully. What we're going to do is risky, but it may be the only chance your father has. Helen opened her bag and began to remove some carefully organized medical items. Her experienced hands moved with precision as she explained the plan to Emily, who listened intently to every word. Mario managed to convince the doorman to let us in, Helen explained, separating some equipment. I'm going to present myself as a private nurse sent by the family doctor. At this point, with your father so weak, Sapphire won't be able to refuse medical assistance without raising suspicion. Emily watched as Helen organized a small case with hospital supplies. And me? What can I do? You, said Helen, taking something out of her bag, are going to be my assistant. She handed Emily a small white coat, clearly made for someone her age. Put this on, and this name tag too. The name tag had a photo of Emily taken a few minutes ago by Helen and identified her as a junior nursing intern. But Sapphire will recognize me, protested Emily. Helen smiled, taking out a few more items from her bag. Not after I'm done with you. With surprising skill, Helen began to transform Emily's appearance. She placed a short dark wig over her brown hair, added non-prescription glasses with thick frames, and applied light makeup that made Emily look a few years older. It's amazing what a little disguise can do, commented Helen, adjusting the glasses on Emily's face, especially when people are looking for a scared little girl, not a young professional. Emily looked at herself in the small mirror that Helen offered her and barely recognized her reflection. How do you know how to do all this? Oh, honey, Helen laughed softly. Before I became a nurse, I worked many years with amateur theater. I learned some useful tricks. The cell phone rang again. Helen answered quickly, making several notes. When she hung up, her face was serious. Mario is positioned near the house with the antidote, she informed. Robert managed to install small cameras in some strategic locations. We have eyes inside the house now. She paused, consulting her notes. Your father is in the master bedroom, as we suspected. Sapphire is with him, along with the supposed doctor and 2 other people. Probably the lawyer and some kind of witnesses. Emily felt her heart clench. How is my father? Helen hesitated for a moment. He's very weak. The cameras show that he's having difficulty even sitting up in bed. But he's conscious, and that's important. She began to put the last pieces of equipment in the case. The plan is as follows. We're going to enter as a supporting medical team. While I distract Sapphire and her doctor with technical questions, you're going to need to find a way to be alone with your father for a few moments. Mario will make sure that happens, but you need to be prepared. Helen took a small vial from her bag. This is a concentrate of vitamins and minerals. Completely harmless, but it'll give us an excuse to be there. I'll say they're supplements prescribed by the family doctor. Emily took the vial, examining the yellowish liquid. And the antidote? Mario will come in as soon as we create a convincing distraction, Helen explained. But first, we need to assess the situation up close and make sure your father is strong, enough to receive the treatment. She held Emily's hands in hers, looking her in the eyes. Emily, I need you to understand one thing. What we're going to do is very risky. If Sapphire finds out who you are, I don't care, Emily interrupted firmly. I'm not going to let my father die. Helen nodded, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. You're very brave, you know, just like your father when he was your age. Emily frowned, surprised. You knew my father? I did, confirmed Helen with a nostalgic smile. I was a nurse at the prep school where he and Mario studied. Two bright boys, full of dreams. But while your father kept his feet on the ground, Mario... She sighed. Well, Mario chose a different path. The cell phone rang once more, interrupting the conversation. Helen listened attentively for a few moments. It's time, she said after hanging up. The car is waiting outside. Remember, you're Marina Silva, my assistant. Don't respond if someone calls you Emily. Don't react to seeing your father. Don't show any emotion beyond polite professionalism. Emily adjusted the lab coat and glasses, trying to control the tremor in her hands. What if I can't do it? Helen smiled gently. You'll do it, honey. You know why? Because you're your father's only hope now. And sometimes it's exactly in the most difficult moments that we discover what we're capable of. They left the shack in silence, carrying their medical cases. An unmarked car was waiting, with Robert at the wheel. As they drove towards the Montgomery mansion, Emily looked out the window at the sky that was beginning to darken. Somewhere in there, her father was fighting for his life, poisoned by the woman who was supposed to love him. Now is not the time to be afraid, thought Emily, clutching the case in her lap. It's time to be strong. The car stopped a block from the house. Robert turned around, handing small communication devices to both of them. Put these in your ear, he instructed. We're going to monitor everything. At the slightest sign of danger, give the code word and we'll get you out of there. What's the code word? Asked Emily, adjusting the small device in her ear. Butterfly, replied Helen. If you hear either of us say that, it means something went wrong. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She was about to enter the lion's den, disguised and determined to save her father, but a doubt still gnawed at her. Helen, she called as they were getting out of the car. Why are you helping me? Why risk yourself like this for us? Helen paused for a moment, her face softening. Because 25 years ago I couldn't save my own son from a disease that slowly consumed him. Since then I swore I would do everything in my power to make sure that no child lost their father that way. She adjusted the case in her hands and straightened her shoulders. Now, let's go. Your father is waiting. The Montgomery mansion looked different in Emily's eyes as she and Helen walked up the steps of the main entrance. The place that had always been her home now had a dark air, as if the walls themselves held dark secrets. The doorman, already instructed by Mario, just nodded briefly when they identified themselves as the medical team. Helen rang the doorbell with the confidence of an experienced professional. A few seconds later, one of the maids opened the door, her face marked by worry. Good evening, Helen said in a professional tone. I'm Nurse Regina Matos, sent by Dr. Santos. This is my assistant, Marina. We're here to assess Mr. Montgomery's condition. The maid hesitated for a moment. Mrs. Sapphire didn't mention... It's an emergency, Helen interrupted firmly. Doctor, Santos was very concerned about the latest test results. We need to see the patient immediately. Before the maid could respond, footsteps were heard on the stairs. Sapphire descended the steps with her usual elegance, but Emily, even through her disguise, could see the tension in her perfectly made-up face. "Who are you?" asked Sapphire, her voice as cold as ice. Helen maintained her professional posture. "Nurse Regina Matos, ma'am. Dr. Santos sent us for an emergency assessment. He's very concerned about Mr. Montgomery's condition." Sapphire narrowed her eyes. "Dr. Santos? But he's no longer my husband's doctor. We have a specialist taking care of him now." "Yes, we were informed," replied Helen without missing a beat. "But as the family doctor for so many years, Dr. Santos feels obligated to follow the case, especially considering the patient's complete history, which only he possesses." Emily watched the interaction in silence, keeping her expression neutral as Helen had instructed. Through the small device in her ear, she could hear the tense breathing of Robert, who was monitoring everything from his observation post. Sapphire seemed to be weighing her options. Refusing medical assistance at that moment could raise suspicions, especially with the maid as a witness. "All right," she conceded finally, "but keep it brief. My husband needs rest." As they climbed the stairs, Emily felt her heart beating so hard she feared everyone could hear it. Each step brought her closer to her father, but also closer to danger. The second-floor hallway had never seemed so long. Sapphire opened the door to the master bedroom, and what Emily saw almost made her lose her composure. Her father was lying in bed, paler and weaker than she had ever seen him. Next to him, a man in a white coat, the supposed specialist, was consulting some papers. In the corner of the room, two other men in suits were talking in low voices. "Dr. Mendez," called Sapphire. "These are nurses sent by my husband's former doctor. They insist on doing an evaluation." The man in the white coat looked up, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "I see no need. The situation is under control." Helen stepped forward, her voice taking on an authority that surprised even Emily. "With all due respect, Doctor, Dr. Santos noted some inconsistencies in the latest tests that need to be verified immediately. You must understand the importance of detailed monitoring in cases like this." While Helen engaged the doctor in a technical discussion, Emily began to organize the equipment they had brought, always staying close to the bed. Her eyes occasionally met her father's, and she needed all her self-control not to show emotion. "Marina," called Helen, "prepare the patient for vital signs collection." Emily approached the bed with the necessary equipment. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the blood pressure monitor on her father's arm. Where is my daughter?" asked Raymond suddenly, his voice weak but audible. Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her professional expression. Sapphire quickly intervened. "Darling, we've already talked about this. Emily is at her aunt's house, remember? She's fine." Raymond shook his head weakly. "No, you said you were going to surprise her. Where is she?" Emily could feel Sapphire's gaze burning on her back. Through the device in her ear, she heard Robert's tense voice. "Stay calm. Mario is on his way with the antidote." Helen, realizing the growing tension, began to ask technical questions of Dr. Mendez, effectively diverting his attention. The men in suits, the lawyer and his witness, seemed impatient. "Mrs. Sapphire," called one of them, "we need to resolve that issue with the documents today." Yes, replied Sapphire, her voice controlled. "As soon as we're finished here." Emily continued her work meticulously, checking her father's vital signs. Each touch was a torture, being so close to him and not being able to say that she was there, that she was okay, that she had discovered everything. "Elevated temperature," she murmured to Helen, maintaining her role. "Very low blood pressure." Helen made some notes. "Dr. Mendez, have you noted these symptoms? They are consistent with..." A noise in the hallway interrupted her speech. Heavy footsteps approached, and Emily felt her heart race. Through the communicator, she heard Robert's voice. "Mario is entering. Prepare yourselves." The bedroom door opened, and all heads turned to see who had arrived. Emily, still close to her father's bed, firmly held the medical equipment in her hands, preparing herself for what was to come. What happened next were seconds that seemed to unfold in slow motion. The expression on Sapphire's face when she saw who was at the door would be something Emily would never forget. Mario Cassiano was standing in the doorway, his body filling the entire entrance. There was nothing left in him that resembled the simple man from the landfill. He wore an impeccable suit, and his posture exuded authority. In his hands, he held a black briefcase and some documents. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Sapphire's face had lost all color. Who are you? How did you get in here?" "It's interesting that you ask," replied Mario, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "Because you, Sapphire, have spent so much time planning for the future that you forgot to investigate the past." He walked to the bed where Raymond was lying. Emily continued her work, pretending to check the medical equipment, but her ears were attuned to every word. "Raymond," called Mario softly. "Long time, my friend." Raymond, in his weakened state, blinked several times, trying to focus his vision. "That voice," he murmured. "I know that voice." "This is absurd," interrupted Dr. Mendez, stepping forward. "The patient needs rest. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Mario smiled, but it was a cold smile. "Dr. Mendez, or should I say Mr. Paulo Ribeiro? It's interesting how some people can buy fake diplomas so easily these days." The supposed doctor paled, stepping back. The men in suits exchanged nervous glances. "I don't know what you're talking about," began Sapphire, trying to maintain her composure. "But you're trespassing on my property and—" "Your property?" interrupted Mario, his voice cutting. "No, Sapphire, this house was never yours. Just like the fortune you so desire never will be." He opened his briefcase and took out some papers. "You know what I have here? The toxicology analysis of the special treatment you've been administering to Raymond. Interesting how such a rare poison can be traced back to a purchase made with your credit card 3 months ago." Sapphire's face alternated between white and red. "That's ridiculous. You have no proof." "Proof?" Mario laughed without humor. "I have all the proof I need, including," he looked directly at the men in suits, "the participation of certain professionals in your little conspiracy. Which reminds me." He gestured towards the door, which opened, revealing Robert and 2 other men. "These gentlemen are from the FBI. They're very interested in a certain document forgery ring that you know well." Chaos erupted in the room. The fake doctor tried to run, but was quickly apprehended. The men in suits raised their hands in surrender, their faces pale with fear. But Sapphire was furious. "You don't understand," she screamed, advancing towards Mario. "I deserved all this. I spent years putting up with this pathetic family, taking care of this sick old man and that spoiled brat." It was at that moment that Emily could no longer contain herself. Taking off her glasses and wig, she stood up, facing Sapphire. "You never cared for anyone but yourself," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You poisoned my father. You tried to kill me." Sapphire recoiled as if she had been slapped. "No, it's not possible. You were in the landfill," completed Emily, "where you abandoned me to die. Yes, I was. But God put someone in my path who actually cares about people." Raymond, who had followed everything in silence, began to stir in bed. "Emily, my daughter, you're alive!" Helen quickly went to him, helping him to calm down. Don't strain yourself, Mr. Montgomery. First, we need to administer the antidote. Mario approached the bed, taking a vial from his briefcase. The same poison that is killing you, old friend, almost killed another businessman 6 months ago. Sapphire has an interesting history of marriages that end in death. While Helen and Emily prepared the antidote, Sapphire made her last, desperate attempt. Running to the room's desk, she grabbed a folder of documents. "You can't prove anything. I have the power of attorney here, signed today. Everything is already mine." Mario smiled again, this time with genuine satisfaction. "You're talking about these documents?" He took another folder from his briefcase. "The originals with Raymond's forged signature. Interesting how ambition can blind someone to the point of not realizing they're being watched 24 hours a day." Sapphire looked at the documents in her hands and then at the ones Mario was holding. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You!" she screamed, pointing at Emily. "This is all your fault, you little—" Before she could finish, Robert restrained her firmly. "Mrs. Sapphire Lucia Mendez, or should I say Clara Rodriguez, you are under arrest for the murder of your previous 2 husbands, aggravated attempted murder, document forgery." As Sapphire was led away, screaming and struggling, Emily approached her father's bed. Tears were now running freely down her face. "Dad," she whispered, holding his hand. "Forgive me for not realizing sooner." Raymond, still weak but already receiving the antidote, squeezed her hand back. "My little princess, you saved my life." Helen finished administering the medication and checked his vital signs. "You see, the antidote is already taking effect. In a few hours, you should start to feel better." Mario watched the scene with a mixture of relief and nostalgia. "Raymond," he called softly, "we need to talk about a lot of things, my friend. But for now, rest. Your daughter is here. She's safe. And this time I promise I won't disappear from your life again." The following days were of slow but steady recovery. Raymond remained hospitalized in a private clinic, receiving the necessary treatment to completely eliminate the poison from his system. Emily didn't leave his side, sleeping on a couch in the room, determined not to miss any more moments with her father. Helen continued to supervise the medical care, now officially hired as the family's private nurse. Her experience and dedication were fundamental to Raymond's recovery, and Emily discovered in her a maternal figure she had never had. One quiet afternoon, while Raymond was sleeping, Emily was sitting by the room's window with Mario, who had become a constant presence at the clinic. He held a cup of coffee, his eyes lost in the landscape outside. "How did you know?" asked Emily softly. "How did you know it was the right time to enter that room?" Mario smiled slightly. "Years of experience in business have taught me to recognize when someone is cornered. Sapphire was desperate, making mistakes. The supposed doctor, the fake documents. She was getting careless." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "But the truth is that it was you, Emily. Your courage in trusting me, a stranger in the landfill, gave me the chance to do the right thing after so many years." Emily adjusted herself in the chair thoughtfully. "Why did you go to live in the landfill? You had all that money." "Money?" Mario laughed without humor. "You know, Emily, I spent most of my life chasing wealth. While your father was building something meaningful, something with purpose, I only cared about numbers in a bank account." He put the cup on the table and took out the old graduation photo from his jacket pocket. "Your father and I had different dreams. He wanted to create something that would allow him to spend time with his family. I just wanted more and more." "And your parents?" asked Emily gently. Mario's face contorted in an expression of pain. "They died waiting for me to visit them. I always said I was busy, that I had important meetings, that I would go on the next holiday. When I finally decided to go, it was too late." Emily reached out and held his hand. "That's why you decided to leave everything behind?" "Yes." he confirmed. The money I valued so much couldn't bring my parents back. It couldn't buy more time with them. So I decided that I needed to change. I needed to reconnect with what really matters in life. Where did you... At that moment, Raymond began to awaken. Emily immediately went to the bed, helping him to sit up. His color was better, and his eyes had already recovered some of their former brilliance. "What are you two talking so much about?" he asked, with a small smile. "About choices," replied Mario, approaching the bed, "and about how sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters." Raymond nodded, understanding. "You were always the smartest of the two of us, Mario, but it took you a while to learn the most important lesson." "And what would that be?" asked Mario, curious. "That true wealth is not in what we possess, but in who we love," replied Raymond, squeezing Emily's hand. Helen entered the room at that moment, carrying a tray with medications. "Time for your medicine, Mr. Montgomery, and afterwards you need to eat well." Breathe. While Helen took care of Raymond, Emily observed the interaction between everyone. It was strange how life could change so quickly. Just a few days ago, she was alone in a landfill, shivering with cold and fear. Now she was surrounded by people who truly cared. "Dad," she called suddenly, "what's going to happen to Sapphire?" Raymond's face grew serious. "She will answer for her crimes, daughter. The police discovered that we weren't her first victims. There was a pattern of marriages, followed by mysterious deaths." "But how did she manage to deceive so many people?" asked Emily. "People like Sapphire are masters of manipulation," explained Mario. "They know exactly what to say, how to act, to win the trust of others. Your father wasn't the first good man to be fooled by a mask of false kindness." Helen, who was finishing organizing the medications, added, "The important thing is that now she can't hurt anyone anymore, and you two have a new chance." Emily smiled, looking at her father. "Yes, we do, and this time I'll be more careful. I won't let anyone separate us again." "You don't even need to worry about that," said Mario, "because now you have a bigger family to protect you." Raymond looked at his friend with gratitude. "Thank you, Mario, for everything, for saving my life, for protecting my daughter." "Don't thank me," interrupted Mario. "I'm the one who needs to thank you. You gave me a second chance to do the right thing, to be the friend I should have been so many years ago." The sun began to set, painting the room with golden hues. Emily snuggled into the chair next to her father's bed, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was still much to be resolved, much healing to be done, but now she knew that she wasn't alone anymore. "You know something?" she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled in. "That tiara you gave me on my birthday. It broke when Sapphire threw me in the landfill." Raymond smiled tenderly. "Don't worry about that, princess. I can give you another one." "You don't need to," interrupted Emily, "because now I know that I don't need a tiara to be special. The love you have for me, the family we formed here, that's worth more than any tiara in the world." The weeks went by, and with them came significant changes in everyone's lives. Raymond recovered his strength day after day, already managing to walk through the clinic's hallways with the help of Emily and Helen. His voice regained its former firmness, and his smile, although still tired, was genuine. One particularly sunny morning, while father and daughter were having breakfast on the small balcony of the clinic room, Mario arrived carrying a folder of documents. "Good morning, family," he greeted, sitting down with them. "I brought some news that we need to discuss." Emily noticed that despite the casual tone, there was a seriousness in Mario's eyes that made her apprehensive. "Did something happen?" she asked. Mario opened the folder and took out some papers. The investigation into Sapphire revealed more things than we imagined. She wasn't acting alone. There was an entire network of people involved in her previous scams. Raymond straightened in his chair, his expression growing serious. What kind of network? People who helped her find targets, forge documents, create new identities, explained Mario. The fake doctor, Dr. Mendez, was just a small part of it. The police discovered that Sapphire had a kind of script that she followed. She looked for successful men, preferably widowers or divorcees with children. She won their trust, got married, and then killed them, completed Emily in a low voice, feeling a chill run down her spine. Exactly, confirmed Mario. But what makes everything even more disturbing is that she kept detailed records of everything. The police found diaries, photos, documents. She documented every step of her plans as if it were a business project. Helen, who had entered the balcony silently, placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. The important thing is that she can't hurt anyone anymore, she said softly. Yes, agreed Mario. But there's one more thing that you need to know. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. Among the documents found, there was information about other families that she was watching, other potential targets. Emily felt her stomach churn. Other children could have gone through what I went through. They could have, replied Mario, but they won't. And that's where the second part of what I came to discuss with you comes in. He took out some more documents from the folder. Raymond, do you remember that college dream of ours? To create something that really made a difference in people's lives? Raymond smiled slightly. How could I forget? You wanted to change the world, Mario. You just didn't know exactly how. Well, I think I've finally figured it out, said Mario, spreading the papers on the table. I've been thinking, all that money that I've accumulated over the years, kept in bank accounts with no real purpose, and then I met Emily. I saw her courage, her strength. He paused, looking at the girl with affection. Emily showed me that sometimes the most extraordinary people can be in the most unlikely places, and it made me think about how many other children might be needing help, protection. What are you proposing? Asked Raymond, leaning forward. To examine the documents. A foundation, replied Mario, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. An organization dedicated to protecting vulnerable children and families, to identifying and preventing risk situations like the one you faced. Helen approached, interested. And how would it work? We'd have a specialized team, social workers, psychologists, lawyers, people trained to recognize signs of abuse and manipulation. We would work in partnership with authorities, offering support and resources for families in at-risk situations. Emily listened attentively, feeling an idea forming in her mind. And could we help other children like me, prevent other Sapphires from harming other families? Exactly, confirmed Mario. But I don't want to do this alone. Raymond, you've always had a natural instinct for taking care of people. Your parking garage chain is proof of that. You created something that allowed you to be present in your daughter's life. Raymond nodded, understanding where his friend was going with this. You want to combine our resources? More than that, replied Mario. I want to combine our experiences, our stories. You know the pain of almost losing everything by trusting the wrong person. I know the emptiness of pursuing wealth without purpose. Together, we can create something truly meaningful. Helen, who had remained silent, absorbing the conversation, stepped forward. Count me in too. As a nurse, I've seen many situations where families needed help but didn't know where to turn. Emily looked from one adult to another, feeling her heart fill with hope. Dad, she called softly, can we do this? Can we help other people? Raymond reached out and held his daughters. And, you know, Princess, when you were little and I gave you those toy tiaras, it wasn't just to make you happy. It was to remind you that you have the power to make a difference in the world. He looked at Mario, a smile forming on his tired face. And now, thanks to you, my daughter, 2 old friends have found a new purpose. So is that a yes? asked. Mario, his eyes shining with expectation. It's more than that, replied Raymond. It's a new beginning for all of us. The morning sun bathed the balcony with its golden light, as if blessing that moment of transformation. Emily looked at the people around her. Her father, recovering not only his health but also a lost friend. Mario, who had found a purpose greater than wealth. Helen, with her maternal heart and her hands always ready to heal. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago she was alone in a landfill, shivering with cold and fear. Now she was at the center of something much bigger than herself, something that could change the lives of other children, other families. You know, she said, breaking the contemplative silence that had settled in, I think I've finally understood what it means to be a real princess. And what would that be? Asked Helen with a gentle smile. It's not wearing a tiara or living in a castle, replied Emily. It's having the courage to help others, even when you yourself are scared. It's transforming your pain into something that can do good. 3 months had passed since that morning on the clinic balcony. Autumn was gently arriving in the city, painting the trees with shades of red and gold. Raymond had finally been discharged and, together with Emily, had moved temporarily to a new house. The old mansion held too many memories of Sapphire to be a place of healing. The new house was smaller, more welcoming, with a garden where Emily spent hours helping Helen plant flowers. The walls were decorated with old and new photos. Raymond and Mario at graduation, Emily with her father in happy moments before Sapphire, and now recent photos of the new family they had formed. One quiet Saturday afternoon, while Emily was watering the daisies she had planted with Helen, Raymond watched her from the balcony. His face was rosier, his body stronger, although he still needed a cane for long walks. She's different, commented Mario, who had just arrived with a folder of documents. More mature, more serene. Raymond nodded, a mixture of pride and melancholy in his gaze. Sometimes I wonder if she didn't grow up too fast. If she didn't lose part of her childhood because of all this. Didn't lose it, replied Helen, who was approaching with a tray of coffee. She just gained a deeper understanding of life. And that, Raymond, can be a precious gift when it comes with love and support. Emily, noticing Mario's arrival, dropped the watering can and ran to the balcony. Did you bring the foundation news? She asked, eager. Mario smiled, opening his folder. I did, and I think you'll like what we've accomplished so far. Everyone sat around the balcony table as Mario spread out the documents. Architectural plans, contracts, photographs, each paper telling a part of the story of what they had built in recent months. The New Dawn Foundation headquarters is almost ready, he explained, showing photos of a modern yet welcoming building. We'll have space for psychological counseling, legal assistance, a special area for children. And the library? Interrupted Emily, her eyes shining. Ah, the library, Mario smiled. Your special project is exactly as you planned it. Shelves full of books, colorful cushions, a space where children can feel safe and free to dream. Raymond watched his daughter with pride. The idea of the library had been all hers, a place where children in vulnerable situations could find refuge in stories, just as she had found comfort in books during difficult times. And the families? Asked Helen, serving coffee to everyone. Have we started the care? Yes, replied Mario, taking more documents from the folder. In fact, we're already monitoring 5 families. Cases similar to yours. People who were targeted by scammers, who need support to rebuild their lives. Emily picked up one of the photos, where a girl about her age smiled, hugging her father. Is this Carla? She asked, recognizing the girl. From the stories Mario had told. Yes, he confirmed. She and her father were the first people we helped. Their story was frighteningly similar to yours. A woman who approached with bad intentions, trying to manipulate the situation. But this time, we were able to intervene before the worst happened. Raymond reached out and held his daughter's hand. "And it was thanks to you, Princess. If you hadn't been so brave, if you hadn't trusted Mario that night in the landfill—" "Actually," interrupted Mario, "I have something special to show you." He took out a last envelope from his folder. "This arrived this morning." Inside the envelope was a letter, written in the uneven handwriting of a child. Emily took it and began to read aloud. "Dear Emily, my name is Carla, and I wanted to thank you. Uncle Mario told me your story, how you were strong and brave, and how you helped create this place that saved me and my dad. He said you suggested the library, and it's now my favorite place in the whole world. Yesterday I found a book about different princesses who save the day, who help other people. It made me think of you. Can we meet someday? I'd really like to be your friend. With love, Carla." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes as she finished reading. Helen gently put an arm around her shoulders. "See," she said softly, "your story is already making a difference in the lives of other people. And that's just the beginning," added Mario. "Every day we receive more requests for help, more families discovering that they are not alone." Raymond picked up his cane and stood up slowly, walking to the edge of the balcony. The sun began to set, painting the sky with soft colors. "You know, Emily," he began, his voice laden with emotion, "when your mother passed away, I promised her that I would always protect you, that I would make you a princess. But I don't think I understood what that meant." He turned to his daughter, his eyes shining with pride. "You have become a much more special princess than I could have imagined. One who doesn't need castles or tiaras because her kingdom is the hearts of the people you help." Emily stood up and hugged her father, burying her face in his chest. The familiar scent of his perfume, the comforting strength of his arms. It was a hug that carried not only love, but also the promise of a better future. "And now," said Mario, smiling at the scene, "we have a new mission ahead. The foundation is growing, and with it, our ability to help more people." Helen gathered the empty cups, her soft face illuminated by the setting sun. "And this time, we're not alone. We have a whole family dedicated to making a difference." Emily stepped back from her father's hug and looked at the people around her. Her father, recovered and strong. Mario, who had found a purpose greater than wealth. Helen, with her maternal heart and her hands always ready to heal. This was her true tiara, she thought. Not something you put on your head, but something you carry in your heart. Winter arrived in the city, bringing with it not only the cold, but also a series of significant changes. The New Dawn Foundation was finally ready for its official opening, an event that Emily awaited with a mixture of anxiety and expectation. The building, once just a project on paper, now stood imposing yet welcoming, its walls painted in soft shades of blue and green. On a particularly cold morning, Emily walked through the foundation's hallways alongside Helen, helping with the final preparations. The library, her special project, was exactly as she had dreamed. Light wood shelves full of carefully selected books, colorful cushions scattered on the floor and on the walls, murals painted with scenes from modern fairy tales. Princesses, saving the day, heroes of all types and colors. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her hand over one of the shelves. "Exactly as I imagined." Helen smiled, adjusting some books. "You know what impresses me the most? How you thought of every detail. The height of the shelves for the smaller children to reach, the themes of the books. I wanted it to be a place where they felt safe," explained Emily, "where they could find stories that made them feel less alone." At that moment, Mario entered the library carrying a mysterious box. His face had that expression that Emily already knew well, the one of someone plotting a surprise. "I have something special to show you," he said, placing the box on one of the tables. "Actually, it's a gift that I developed along with some writer friends." He opened the box and took out a hardcover book, beautifully illustrated. Emily felt her heart skip a beat when she read the title, The Landfill Princess, a story of courage and hope. "Mario," she began, her voice trembling. "Wait," he interrupted gently. "There's more." He opened the book, revealing delicate illustrations that told a very familiar story. We changed the names, of course, and some details, but the essence is here. A brave girl who, even in the most difficult moments, didn't lose her ability to trust and love. Helen approached, her eyes shining with contained tears. "It's your story, honey, but it's also the story of so many other children who need to know that they're not alone." Emily flipped through the pages carefully, recognizing her journey, transformed into art. Can I read a little to you?" Mario and Helen nodded, sitting down on the colorful cushions. Emily took a deep breath and began to read. Once upon a time, there was a different princess. Her tiara wasn't made of gold, but of love. Her castle didn't have tall towers, but it had a father who loved her more than anything in the world. Until one day, a dark shadow appeared in her life. Emily's voice flowed smoothly as she read, occasionally stopping to admire the illustrations. When she got to the part about the landfill, her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. On the darkest night of her life, when everything seemed lost, the princess learned that sometimes angels appear in the most unlikely places, and that true treasures are not made of gold, but of courage, love, and hope. "It's beautiful," said a voice from the door. It was Raymond, who had arrived silently during the reading. He approached, leaning on his cane, his eyes shining with pride. "Dad!" Emily ran to hug him. "I didn't know you were coming today." "And miss this?" he smiled. "Never. Besides, I brought a surprise." He gestured towards the door, where a girl about Emily's age waited timidly. Emily recognized her immediately from the photo. It was Carla, the first child the foundation had helped. "Hi," said Carla softly, taking a step forward. I really wanted to meet you." Emily felt her heart fill with an emotion she could barely contain. She approached Carla and without hesitating gave her a tight hug. "I really wanted to meet you too," she said. "Want to see the library? I helped choose every book." The two girls were soon lost in their own conversation, sharing stories and discovering how much they had in common. The adults watched the scene with emotional smiles. "It's amazing," commented Helen, "how children have this ability to transform pain into hope." Mario nodded, taking more books from the box. "That's why I wanted to publish this story. It's not just about Emily. It's about all the children who need to know that they can overcome their difficult moments. And about all the unlikely angels who appear to help," added Raymond, looking significantly at Mario. At that moment, Robert entered the library, carrying more boxes. "Sorry to interrupt, but more book donations have arrived, and there's a special surprise for Emily." He put the boxes on the floor and took something out of one of them. It was a tiara not made of plastic or metal, but handcrafted from pages of old books, delicately intertwined and decorated with small paper flowers. "It was made by the children from the shelter we're going to help," explained Robert. "They heard your story and wanted to give you something special." Emily took the tiara carefully, her eyes tearing up. Carla approached, admiring the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful," she said, "and it suits you. A tiara made of stories for someone who is helping to write new stories." Emily placed the tiara on her head, feeling its delicate weight. It wasn't like the plastic princess tiara her father had given her on her birthday, the one sapphire had broken in the landfill. This was different, special. It was a symbol not only of her own journey, but of all the stories that were yet to come. The day of the official opening of the new Dawn Foundation dawned sunny, as if the sky itself wanted to celebrate the occasion. The building was decorated with colorful ribbons and balloons, and a small stage had been set up in the garden for the opening ceremony. Families began to arrive, some bringing children who soon ran to explore the new space. Emily watched everything from the library window, her heart overflowing with emotion. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress, and on her head, the tiara made of book pages shone under the sunlight. Next to her, Carla adjusted some cushions, the two already inseparable after just a few days of friendship. "Are you nervous?" asked Carla, noticing how Emily wrung her hands. "A little," admitted Emily. "I've never spoken in front of so many people before." Helen, who had just entered the library, smiled gently. "You're going to do great, honey. You just need to speak from the heart, as you always do." And at that moment, Raymond appeared at the door, leaning on his cane. He was elegant in his dark suit, and his face radiated pride. "It's time, Princess." Emily took a deep breath and followed her father to the garden, where dozens of people were already settling into the chairs arranged in front of the stage. Mario was at the center, adjusting the microphone, his impeccable suit contrasting with the nervous smile he gave Emily. The ceremony began with Mario giving an emotional speech about transformation and second chances. He briefly told his own story of how money had almost made him lose his humanity, and of how a brave girl had helped him find a new purpose. "But today," he said, his voice laden with emotion, "we are not here just to inaugurate a building. We are here to celebrate the birth of something much bigger, an extended family, a place where broken people can rebuild together." He paused, looking directly at Emily. "And now, I would like to call to the stage someone very special, someone who, with her courage and love, inspired all of this." Emily climbed the steps of the stage with trembling legs. The sun shone on her paper tiara, and for a moment she felt small before so many eyes. But then she saw her father smiling, Helen with tears in her eyes, Carla giving her a thumbs up, and she found her voice. "When I was younger," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I thought princesses only existed in fairy tales, that they always lived in castles, always wore gold tiaras, always had guaranteed happy endings." She touched her paper tiara gently. "But I learned that real life is different, that sometimes we need to go through difficult moments to discover our true strength, that sometimes angels appear disguised as simple people, and that love, true love, is not something you find in fairy tales, but something you build day after day with courage, forgiveness, and hope." The words flowed naturally now as Emily shared her story, no longer with fear or shame, but with the certainty that each difficult moment had made her stronger. "This foundation," she continued, "is not just a building with rooms and a library. It's a place where stories can start over, where children like me, like Carla, like so many others, can discover that they are not alone, that there is always hope, there is always a new dawn." When she finished her speech, the silence that followed was broken by emotional applause. Several people wiped away tears, and Emily saw her father being hugged by Mario, the two friends, united again by a purpose greater than themselves. The ceremony continued with the official inauguration of the library, which Emily and Carla made a point of personally presenting to all the children present. In every little face that lit up at the sight of the books, in every shy smile that opened up upon discovering a new world within the colorful pages, Emily saw a piece of herself. In the late afternoon, as most of the guests had already left, Emily found a moment of quiet in the garden. She sat on a bench under a tree, still wearing her paper tiara, and closed her eyes, feeling the soft breeze on her face. "Mind if I join you?" asked a familiar voice. It was her father, Raymond, who sat down beside her with a satisfied sigh. "You know," he said after a moment, "your mother would have been so proud of you today." Emily rested her head on her father's shoulder. "You think so?" "I'm sure of it," he replied, putting his arm around her. "She always said you had a special heart, bigger than the world." Mario approached, followed by Helena and Carla. Everyone settled on the bench and the grass around it, forming an intimate and welcoming circle. "So," Mario asked with a smile, "how does it feel to officially be a real princess?" Emily laughed softly. "I don't feel like a princess. I feel like myself. And I think that's even better." "Ah. Well," said Helena, "I guess we've discovered that there are many different kinds of royalty. Some wear gold crowns and live in castles. Others wear paper tiaras and turn landfills into gardens," completed Carla, making everyone smile. The sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. Emily looked at the people around her. Her father, strong again, free from the poison that almost killed him. Mario, who had traded his obsession with wealth for something much more valuable. Helena, who had brought the maternal warmth she so desperately needed. And Carla, her first true friend, living proof that her suffering had not been in vain. "You know what?" she said, breaking the contemplative silence. "I think I understand the true meaning of happily ever after." "And what would that be?" her father asked curiously. "It's not about never having problems again or living in a perfect castle," she replied. "It's knowing that no matter what happens, you have people who truly love you, people who would stand by your side even if you lost everything, even if you had nothing but a piece of cardboard to shelter you." She looked at her paper tiara, now slightly crumpled after a full day of use. "And sometimes the most valuable crowns aren't made of gold or diamonds. They're made of stories, of tears, of new beginnings." The last ray of sunlight of the day pierced through the leaves of the tree, making Emily's tiara shine as if it were made of pure light. There, in that perfect moment, surrounded by her chosen family, she finally understood that her story had never been about being a princess. It was about being human, about falling and getting up, about losing and finding, about transforming pain into love. And mainly, it was about discovering that the true treasures of life are not kept in vaults or palaces, but in the hearts of the people we choose to call family.